August 2018. August 11th, 2018. If the particles are arranged in a circular track like train tracks of opposing EMF/charge, and you build a graphene lattice between that and the movement layer of two dominantly charged particles with a particle that changes charge, brackets, spins, I guess, end brackets, opposite to the charge that the track is covered so that it produces a current, you can build really small generators that function in place of batteries. Or you could just build molecule-level wine generators. You can make wine generator wafers at their smallest possible size and stack them in sets within the battery casing, and since they're producing levels of charge, you can build switches to limit or produce more charge as demanded. I think I can draw what the shape of the wafer would have to look like. The limitation is making a wafer-sized generator, but that can be done by changing the layout of a generator to be two flat surfaces with one layer of moving pieces, in brackets, the rotor, between them. Unless you can build a single layer generator anyway. I think the end goal is to get the same movement without moving mechanical parts so they can't break down, which I think can be done. I would need to learn about wafer creation and the movement of molecules, within. With strong enough tape, can you do the same graphene creation finding to a magnet? Would a man-made magnet have a different shape? Would the shape of a smallest magnet particle that produces a repellent force greater than its size be useful enough to propel the generator? Yeah, this will work. Instead of attaching the movement mechanism to the top of the generator, you build it inside the generator at the same level as the rotation needs to take place. That way you end up with the minimum level of layers. It's just a pancake generator. You just invert the propulsion system to produce outward instead of inward. August 11th, 2018. I have a friend, in brackets, I think. He would work for different groups working on their products without having to limit himself to one lifestyle. He would then have a collection of documents with his work in it that would get him more work. Why can't I just work on a single project depending on what they want and what I'm interested in? Do paid training until I could help figure out the problem, see it implemented, and go into the next thing. If it's working on one of my ideas like the generator or making the battery-sized version of it, then wouldn't it be whoever helped fund it got to put their name on it? I would, of course, have to own any patents I made outright, which I would then lease to the various companies to make a profit. It would give me the funding to give Nedios the life she wanted, invest and do some social engineering in my community. 40,000 work hours available. Doing the most important things first would be the most efficient. The goal is to reorganize the game board or else the system fails and we don't move on to the next stage as a whole. People are getting ahead of themselves. You can't get to level 2 until you clear level 1. August 12th, 2018. If you can make a magnetic atom spin in place by breaking its bonds and by surrounding it by the needed opposing magnetic atoms around it, and left various openings along the path of rotation where the field changes state, you could have a stationary wire set up that would still produce a charge. What would need to be made to house a single spinning atom in free rotation? A 9-sided atomic cube with 4 openings, one in each side of the path of rotation, could be replaced by a wire atom, and it would have almost no moving parts other than the spinning center atom at its center. August 17th, 2018. First idea, clearing the space debris field. The only thing that stops a bullet are the ground, a thick enough wall, and ballistics gel. This later was changed to something else, but that comes in the next book. Since we can't bring the first 2 up into the field, then it'll have to be the ladder that clears the debris. One of the problems is that you may not be able to get it large enough and strong enough to effectively stop the movement of a satellite. To effectively slow their movements, you could bring the gel up to a certain speed to negate some of the impact. It would start behind the target and rotate in line with the next contact point at speed. Since it's moving already, it negates some of the impacting material's force upon impact. Propelled guided gel would make multiple collections smoother, but be much more expensive. The other option is to map the points of impact and throw a section of gel unassisted into the field and let it hit multiple targets as it descends. The goal should be to gather the impacted materials to a manageable rotational level so they could be gathered and reused. The gel should attempt to be self-sealing so that multiple impacts don't force previous collected materials out back into the field. It'll probably be statically or chemically bonded to do so. I have a feeling that a putty-like material versus a shape retaining, in brackets, cube, for instance, in brackets, would get more hits if thrown into the field as long as it didn't break and bounce back closer to its original shape, and a stiffer shape retaining material would be easier to propel between objects. I think that most concentric rings of atoms in the smaller size and greatest number by layer would make the best formulation of kinetic force absorbing especially if they're offset to catch the layer before them. As the first layer breaks, there are more rings behind it to spread the force out evenly in the direction of travel. If the material is energy absorbent enough without breaking, it's just impact and force the object to slow, and it can be repeated until the object stops. Because the objects are moving in the same direction, it would take more impacts to slow to the needed speed if the materials are not strong enough to stop the object outright. It's only going to be moving slow enough to counteract the object's rotation, but fast enough to make the least difference in speed between the two objects to limit the stress of impact on the gel. To stop an out-of-control object, you need to bring something in to guide its descent or overthrow its trajectory, or you need a wall for it to hit. Binding something to get it up to speed, then take the impact while attaining control of the object's path. Its own propulsion method is the way to go. The gel is part of it. I think it would take less energy to have the gathering object travel an elliptical path versus a round path around the target, because as you descend into the target's pathway behind it, an elliptical travel isn't as sharply downward as a round movement would be. There's no need to readjust the motion as sharply as a round path would cause, though I suppose it would be an elliptical descent, not an elliptical rotation above that would be needed. What's interesting is that if the gathering machine was made of modules of the same design, you could gather one item and guide them down with the first module into the path of the second item you want gathered, and move the second module of intercept between the first gathered piece and the second so that the module can absorb the impact versus damaging the first gathered piece. You could do this continuously, limited only by the size of the traveling objects being gathered versus the gathering module and the impact speeds and forces needing to be overcome. The problem is that as the object gains length, it becomes increasingly more expensive resource-wise to get up to speed again. So you could choose to cascade the release of each module in its captured piece, so the remaining modules could get up to speed efficiently, or you could work out the maximum number of pieces you could intercept in one motion with the minimum number of speed increases needed. Depends on whether the debris speeds up or slows down as the rotational height increases. If slower is lower, then it's easiest to start off fastest up above and slow it down as you come gathering intercepts or reducing rotations. If it's faster lower, then you're going to want to cascade the releases to save on fuel. Is it better to spend more fuel, in brackets, having to make much larger propellant tanks / increasing delivery and travel costs, in brackets, to get a bunch of stuff down to one level all at once? Or is it more efficient to spend less fuel per interaction and split them up, making gathering them as the end of the process less efficient? August 18th, 2018. What happens to airflow if the bent part of a wing doesn't take up the entire width of the tip, forcing air off the wingtip at a diagonal angle relative to propulsion? Is it worth building a flap there to control that motion? Then there's a bunch of drawings of a crosswing in their air drafts. August 18th, 2018. The longest bond is between carbon and aluminum atoms, so you would first bond the stabilizing atoms to an aluminum atom and sever the bond at the maximum length so that the severed bonds of the magnetic atom need to spin can sit on the housing. As long as the bonds from the magnetic atom do not stick to the carbon, which they shouldn't because they're diamagnetic, it should create a housing to allow the propulsion atoms to act on the production atom. The problem is that aluminum atoms are not diamagnetic, so it may be prudent to bond aluminum to carbon and break the bond at the carbon side so the tips are diamagnetic. The problem there is that aluminum doesn't have enough bonds for the shape of the device even in the middle atom set, so finding another bond that is diamagnetic and ionic would be needed. Bonding the production atom to two atoms and breaking the bond at the outer atom's edge creates a spindle on each end that should become magnetic if the right material is used. Probably best to join it to two magnetic atoms of the same material and severing the bond, in brackets, ionic severance, end brackets. If there are enough extras added to the rotating outer layer and they're done at opposing ends of the shell, then they can be used as grips to center the production atom in the enclosure. Can you ionically stack connections to the same point in the shell's rotation? If not, but you can do it evenly around the rotation of the shell, you can create a larger housing structure to hold these in place so they may spin freely but not out of place. ? Is there a stabilizing state that doesn't need to be cooled to be achieved? Okay. Next part. C:(P:)M:(W). C:, 4 bonded maximum needed, 3 covalent, 1 ionic. Diamagnetic material needed without cooling. P:, 2 bonded needed, 2 covalent. Brackets. Don't attach to wire unless you want charge to pass through magnetic P atom, unless that is the only way to stabilize the direction of the needed magnetic field. Depends on whether W loses charge regardless of connection. If needed, a ground atom brackets, or at least reflective end brackets, can be used to stabilize the W atom in place of a C atom, M colon. 2 ionic bonds needed. Bonds are made on either side of atoms so that they may be repelled by diamagnetic ionic bonds of C atoms, W colon. Minimum 3 covalent bonds. Though its charge doesn't pass into P, then those bonds can be used to stabilize the W atom. Unless you do diagonal bonds to C, then an extra covalent bond would be needed per atom. Depends on bond length. Diamagnetic atoms. And then again, there are more drawings. Diamagnetic atoms creating atomic quotation marks pressures on the shape of the magnetic field produced by the production atom, forcing hardest against the center of the atom to create an indent at the center of each side and still close at the top and bottom center atoms of each side versus each corner stabilizing atom. It basically makes a torus. Graphite is diamagnetic atoms, ? Torus atomic magnetic field should hold it in place as it rotates. Diamagnetic atoms should also repel opposing magnetic pole as it rotates so that the propulsion atoms and production atoms do not touch. Since the force acting on the propulsion atoms is 3 times the resistance working on the opposing atom, the opposing magnetic pole, it should move. If a difference on the face of the rotating field is needed to make quotations gear teeth and quotations, it can be done. Can the length between atomic bonds be altered while connecting them? It is crucial. Do I need to have the wire atoms rotated parallel to the field, or because an atom is round at the singular level, does it not make a difference? Atom bond length is determined by the electron pull to one another. More electrons means greater pull equals shorter distance. Can an electron be added to an atom to form a bond and then removed? Will the bond distance drift, or can you force the difference in bond length by surrounding the atoms needed in place with less excitable atoms that are more rigid as a frame that repel the needed atoms strongly enough to lost electrons moot without vast cooling? Room temperature operation is key to usability. The outer cage of atoms would need to have different electron numbers to shorten or lengthen their repellent nature. To force diamagnetic atoms into place, you would use magnetic atoms of various strengths in a uniform pattern. Could you use iron connected to magnetic atoms to produce a weaker repellent nature if different magnetic atoms produce uniform fields? It may need teeth. If so, this torus looks like this. And then there are more drawings. Iron atoms can make the cage, and outside that, any number of magnetic atoms can be arranged to force repellent pressure on the generator through the cage. More drawings of the torus being acted upon. Unfortunately, the magnetic field is equally divided, so the atom will not rotate. Perhaps the diamagnetic atoms can be positioned to force rotation if teeth are made. Again, me trying to figure out diamagnetic rotational fields within a cube of atoms, so like a diamond lattice, and their direction. Diamagnetic atoms in place of propulsion magnetic atoms, but offset both towards the center atom and down upon the atom, as long as the stabilizing atoms don't interfere. Brackets, the outer ones may have to be replaced so as not to act as a magnetic field, but the inner side atoms would remain to hold the torus in place, and bracket would cause the field to rotate. Since you may not be able to add electrons to the propulsion atoms and torus atoms without affecting the atoms around it, you can use magnetic atoms outside the cube to repel those atoms into place. The outer casing would be used to strengthen the build and hold the magnetic atoms in place so they could act on the propulsion and torus atoms. This is probably too inefficient to be useful. The problem is you need something to act on the magnetic field to get it to rotate so that it takes a few atoms. You need a way to hold the magnetic atom in place so that requiring stabilization atoms. You need to move the propulsion atoms into place without adding electrons so that not all the atoms around it are equally attracted to it, so that requires outside magnetic atoms. And you might as well build a strong case around the fragile graphite atoms, but I think that's the minimum at this time it would take to build a one-atom dependent generator. August 20th, 2018. Wouldn't it be interesting if the center of black holes at a maximum density that once reached began to break through this reality's bonds and forcing them into the space between those new bonds, brackets relatively a new dimension, end brackets, and as those elements that survived in part had extremely fast chemical reactions as they spill out as they attempted to become the nearest proper bond possible again, and dark matter was what leaked through that couldn't be formed into anything, and had the opposite brackets of what we traditionally think of as a, end brackets, bond between each particle. It would be interesting if the fastest thing that was possible to travel within the black hole's grasp was sped up with each iteration of shrinking in on itself like a spring-loaded jack before releasing as it spewed forth to this new area. Would denser things inside a black hole shift towards its core? Would the elements break down into layers of stability before being forced to shrink to the point where the black hole's dimensional bonds break down and the materials flood outwards at their increased speed? Like if the dimension that ours was formed in had a quotation light speed, end quotation, much slower relative to ours because it was compressed in on itself so much? This one's fun. August 24th, 2018. The efficiency playthrough. When playing against other teams as the human races against other expedient players, brackets races yet unknown, end brackets, for control of the game board, bracket this current dimension, end bracket, it is the player that can be the most efficient that has the best chance of conquering the board or even lasting to the end of game time. Humanity is currently wholly inefficient with the limited supplies the world has offered and remains. A fractured team fights within itself until resources are depleted or the starting base is destroyed or uninhabitable, and that form of gameplay ends. The team loses before moving on to the next level of play. The team that can unify completely, list all the known and possible future issues to take into account scientifically as well as mathematically, and plan their resources, bracket of which there are always limited amounts, on one team's home field's domain, end bracket. The most efficient have the longest potential playtime of any team. Think of time as terms of x, y, x plus y, x times y, x to the power of y, and so forth in terms of will this be considered short-sighted at this point in time. List your known issues that should be resolved or could be resolved. The proper resources were allocated, regardless of where on the home team's domain they were located as a partially poisoned domain, eventually limits or poisons the whole domain. If thinking of units within the team affected by the effects of a given action, use the same terms given for all time until you reach current population and potential future populations. Fix your home domain until it is running at peak efficiency and then spread out your influence. Doing so beforehand may bolster morale, but it does nothing to improve the longevity of home domain, which until you reach the point where satellite domains reach measurable amounts and offer some resource reward for the utilization. Expanding the longevity of the domain's resources at the most efficient rate is the goal for any expansion. If potential domains, brackets planets, and brackets, are mineable before they are inhabitable, then they're still valuable as a robotic resource